They tell us history is settled. We are taught that the timeline of human existence is a straight line, fully mapped out, neatly catalogued, and preserved safely behind the glass of museum display cases and within the dense pages of archaeological reports. But if you drive out into the desolate, sun-baked stretches of the Nevada desert, you begin to realize just how fragile that straight line really is. Out there, in the vastness of the Great Basin, the landscape itself feels ancient. It is a place of extremes, of cracked alkali flats, jagged mountain ranges, and silence so profound it rings in your ears. And it is here, in this unforgiving environment, that one story has stubbornly refused to stay buried. In the late 19th century, strange accounts began circulating among the white settlers and prospectors moving into the territory. They were hearing whispers of an ancient enemy remembered by the northern Paiute people. It was a terrifying oral tradition of a violent, parasitic culture associated with floating rafts, cannibalism, and a final, apocalyptic battle that ended in smoke and fire inside a massive limestone cavern. As the decades passed and these stories were passed from campfires to sensational newspaper columns, later retellings gave this enemy another, more terrifying feature. They were said to be giants, massive red-haired cannibals standing 8 to 10 feet tall. Then, in 1911, a commercial mining operation blasted its way into a massive natural fortress known as Lovelock Cave. What they uncovered in the dark stopped the world in its tracks. Beneath centuries of bat guano and desert dust, they found a mass grave. They pulled thousands of ancient artifacts and human remains from the earth, uncovering evidence of a complex, sophisticated culture that had lived beside the vanished lakes of the Great Basin, thousands of years before the arrival of European settlers. To those who wanted to believe, the discoveries in Lovelock Cave were absolute confirmation of a terrifying ancient war. To archaeologists, the cave revealed something historically profound, but far more complicated than the headlines suggested. So where did the legend of the red-haired giants actually come from? What did the authentic Paiute tradition really say before the newspapers got hold of it? And did the excavations uncover evidence of a supernatural race that history has deliberately ignored, or does the cave hold a mystery that has been transformed by more than a century of sensational retelling? To trace the true origins of the Lovelock mystery, we cannot rely on frontier rumors or internet conspiracies. We have to look at the first documented, written record. In 1883, a remarkable northern Paiute woman named Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins published her autobiography, Life Among the Paiutes, Their Wrongs and Claims. Winnemucca was a trailblazer. Born Thokmetani, or Shellflower, she was an educator, a passionate activist, and a translator who walked tirelessly between two rapidly clashing worlds. Her book was the first known autobiography written by a Native American woman, and, within its pages, she recorded the history of her people. Included in this history was a terrifying oral tradition passed down by her ancestors. Winnemucca wrote of a hostile tribe that her people called the Si-Te-Cah. The name translates roughly to tule eaters, because this enemy tribe was known for weaving massive rafts from the fibrous tule water reeds that grew along the ancient shorelines. According to her meticulous record, the Si-Te-Cah were not a peaceful neighboring tribe with whom the Paiute occasionally skirmished. They were a nightmare. They were a predatory force. Winnemucca wrote that they would waylay the Paiute, kill them, and consume them. But there was one specific physical detail that Winnemucca documented. A detail that would later be seized upon and used to set the world on fire. She explicitly stated that this enemy tribe possessed reddish hair. She even claimed to have a dress, a deeply sacred family heirloom passed down through generations that was trimmed with this exact red hair. It had been kept as a spoil of a long-forgotten war, a physical testament to the defeat of a monstrous enemy. However, it is vital to note what Winnemucca did not write. Nowhere in her extensive, detailed account did she ever state that these people were giants. That specific detail, the 8 to 10 foot stature, would be injected into the bloodstream of the story decades later by men looking for fame, fortune, and a profitable headline. But the core of the story, a vicious, cannibalistic tribe with red hair, driven to extinction and sealed inside a cave, was undeniably real, rooted deeply in authentic northern Paiute tradition. To understand how such a war could take place, you have to understand that the Nevada desert was not always a desert. Modern geology beautifully confirms the environmental setting of the Paiute legend. At the end of the Pleistocene epoch, thousands of years ago, the Great Basin was mostly underwater. It was covered by Lake Lahontan, a massive inland sea that stretched across what is now northwestern Nevada. The climate was cooler, wetter, and the region was a lush, vibrant wetland, teeming with waterfowl, fish, and heavy vegetation. According to the oral tradition, the Si-Te-Cah dominated the center of this massive lake. They lived on the water, utilizing their woven tule rafts to create floating fortresses. This gave them a terrifying tactical advantage. At night, cloaked by the thick marsh fogs, they would glide silently to the shorelines to harvest the Paiute camps. They would strike quickly in the dark, dragging their victims back into the mist before any organized defense could be mounted. For generations, the Paiute lived in a state of hypervigilance, forced to endure the constant psychological terror of beak, an enemy that could approach from the water at any moment. But environments change. Over the course of centuries, the global climate warmed. The great inland sea began to evaporate, shrinking rapidly. The lush wetlands slowly turned into the alkaline desert, the sagebrush seas, and the dry alkali flats we see today. As the water vanished, so did the tactical advantage of the Si-Te-Cah. They lost their aquatic mobility. They were forced onto the land, and as the regional food supply dwindled due to the changing climate, their raids on the Paiute likely became more brazen, more desperate, and more devastating out of sheer necessity. Realizing they were facing total annihilation in this rapidly changing world, the Paiute decided they could no longer play defense. The oral tradition states that they united their fractured tribes. They gathered their numbers and resolved to wage a war of complete and utter extinction to secure their own survival. They began a brutal campaign, methodically hunting the remaining Si-Te-Cah across the drying desert basin. The Paiute corralling tactics pushed the remnants of the enemy tribe toward a massive, natural limestone fortress, a cavern carved by the ancient waves of Lake Lahontan itself. Today, we call it Lovelock Cave. The legend recorded by Sarah Winnemucca captures the climax of this war with terrifying vividness. The Paiute surrounded the mouth of the cavern. They demanded the enemy come out and fight like warriors. When the Si-Te-Cah refused, choosing instead to barricade themselves in the deep, pitch-black recesses of the cave, the Paiute enacted a ruthless siege. The warriors gathered massive amounts of dry sagebrush, deadwood, and desert scrub, piling it high at the entrance of the cave, and then they set it ablaze. Imagine the sheer terror of that moment. As the massive bonfire roared to life, the warriors used woven mats to intentionally fan the heavy, choking smoke deep into the cavern network. It was a flawless, inescapable trap. Those who tried to run from the suffocating smoke and burst through the flames were met with a relentless rain of Paiute arrows. Those who retreated further into the dark suffocated as the oxygen It was slowly burned away. According to the tradition, an entire culture was erased from the earth in a single, brutal siege. Once the fire burned down, the warriors triggered a rock slide, sealing the entrance with a wall of rock and ash. The memory of the Si-Te-Cah became a ghost story. For decades, the story of the cave siege remained exactly that. A violent, imaginative piece of local folklore. Until the prospectors arrived. In the early 20th century, the Industrial Revolution was starving for resources. One of the most valuable commodities on Earth was fertilizer, specifically nitrate-rich bat guano. Lovelock Cave, having sat largely undisturbed for thousands of years, was filled with it. In some places, the guano was layered up to 6 feet deep. In 1911, a pair of miners named David Pugh and James Hart secured the rights to mine the cave. They didn't care about local legends, and they certainly didn't care about archaeology. They cared about profit. They blew open the partially sealed entrance with dynamite, rigged up a mining cart system, and started digging blindly into the dark. As they dug through the upper layers of guano, they began hitting obstructions. They were pulling up perfectly woven baskets, ancient weapons, and intricate textiles. And then they started pulling up bodies. They had dug straight into a prehistoric cemetery. This is the exact moment where history fractures completely into myth. Word of the discoveries leaked out. A mining engineer named John T. Reed caught wind of the site and, recognizing its potential significance, began aggressively promoting it to institutions. But the media of the early 1900s was fueled by yellow journalism and a public obsession with the macabre, bizarre, and the macabre. Soon, stories were circulating wildly across the country. Reports claimed that miners were unearthing skeletons measuring 8, 9, and even 10 feet tall. But the most shocking claim of all, the detail that seemed to validate Sarah Winnemucca's account overnight, was the hair. Some of the mummified remains pulled from the dust possessed distinct, thick, red hair. To the public, the discoveries appeared to perfectly echo the details preserved in Paiute tradition. The 1883 account wasn't 80. It was a literal crime scene report. The red-haired giants were real, and they had been found. But to the scientific community, the cave was about to tell a different and much more complicated story. In 1912, the University of California finally sent an archaeologist named Llewellyn L. Loud to conduct a salvage excavation. By the time he arrived, the miners had already destroyed the upper stratigraphic layers of the cave, severely compromising the site's timeline. Despite the destruction, Loud managed to recover roughly 10,000 artifacts in his first season alone. In 1924, he returned with M.R. Harrington, and they uncovered even more. What they found proved that Lovelock Cave was one of the most important archaeological sites in North America. But the verified excavation records, the field notes, and the photographs have never, at any point, established the existence of an 8 to 10-foot human population. The skeletons recovered were well within normal human size ranges. Some male skeletons were described as robust, perhaps standing around 6 feet tall, which would certainly have been imposing compared to the average height of populations at the time. But they were biologically normal humans. There were no giants. So, how did the giant rumors start? In the unregulated chaos of the early mining, individual bones were often misidentified or deliberately arranged to look larger for photographs. Fossilized animal bones from the Pleistocene era, such as extinct megafauna that once roamed the Lake Basin, were frequently confused by untrained miners for human remains. But what about the famous red hair? This is where the science of taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay, provides a fascinating answer. Supporters of the giant theory still argue today that the reddish hair proves the Paiute traditions were entirely literal. But forensic anthropologists and archaeologists caution that ancient, buried dark hair frequently changes color over time. Human hair color is determined by melanin, specifically two types: eumelanin, which makes hair brown or black, and pheomelanin, which makes hair red or blonde. Eumelanin is structurally less stable than pheomelanin. When dark hair is buried in an environment highly concentrated with ammonia, salt, and heat, an environment exactly like a dry desert cave packed with thousands of pounds of bat guano, the eumelanin breaks down and degrades much faster. Through this environmental exposure and oxidation, ancient black hair will naturally bleach and transition into a reddish or auburn color over the centuries. We see this exact same chemical phenomenon in ancient Egyptian mummies, bog bodies in Europe, and Paracas skulls in Peru. The red hair found in Lovelock Cave was almost certainly dark brown or black when those individuals were alive. The absence of verifiable giant specimens has allowed the legend to grow and mutate for more than a century. Today, modern internet conspiracy theories claim that the Smithsonian Institution confiscated the giant bones, shipping them away under the cover of darkness in unmarked crates. They claim the bones are locked away in subterranean vaults to protect the established scientific timeline from being rewritten. The reality is much more grounded, but it is no less profound. If you visit the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, Nevada, today, you will see the brilliant craftsmanship of the people who lived on the ancient lake. You will see intricately woven fishing nets, heavy stone tools, and the breathtaking tule duck decoys. These decoys, crafted from bound reeds and covered in real bird feathers, are over 2,000 years old. They are so aerodynamically perfect they would still float perfectly today. They prove that the people of Lovelock Cave were not mindless, supernatural monsters. They were brilliant artisans, masters of their environment, and deeply human. What you will not see at the museum are human remains. Because under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the remains found in Lovelock Cave were respectfully repatriated to the modern Native American tribes of the region. They were not hidden by a malicious scientific cover-up. They were returned to the earth with the dignity and respect they were entirely denied by the commercial miners of 1911. In the end, the truth of Lovelock Cave does not need 10-foot giants to be terrifying or endlessly fascinating. The real story is one of radical climate change, of a desperate, multi-generational war for dwindling resources, and of an oral tradition so powerful it preserved the cultural memory of a vanished people for thousands of years. The Paiute did not invent a myth, they chronicled a history. The Si-Te-Cah may not have been literal giants in physical stature, but in the memories of the people who fought them in the dark, and in the legacy they left buried beneath the dust. They cast a shadow that has never faded.